Hello, I'm Erik Wait, and this is lesson 1 in our series on the attributes of God. As with any course on theology, this is only an introduction to the subject of the attributes of God. The objective for this work is basically twofold. First, to learn more about the person and nature of God as he has revealed himself in Scripture, that is, who he is and what he is like in his essence or essential character, and to relate what we learn about the nature of God to our Christian thinking, attitude, and spiritual experiences in daily life. The primary books for this course that I would recommend are The Knowledge of the Holy by A.W. Tozer and The Attributes of God by A.W. Pink. There are several attributes that Pink and other authors in the bibliography that cover, which I do not. So you may want to read those chapters that I do not cover in this video series. I also would recommend that you read part 5, that is chapters 17 to 26 of John Frame's book, The Doctrine of God, a Theology of Lordship. Now, when we study theology, we need to keep in mind that this is not merely an academic enterprise. This is not just about gaining head knowledge, but rather it is an act of worship. Therefore, when we talk about God, it must be done in a manner that is worthy of the one who is present with us. It is my goal that each lesson will be taught in such a manner that we learn more about God, resulting in a greater devotion to God, and that result in a spiritual walk that reflects the fullness of the knowledge of our God. So there are 20 lessons in this series. The first is the course introduction, which we're going through right now. Lesson 2 will be an introduction to theology proper. Lesson 3 will be on the reality and revelation of God. The 4th will be on the possibility of knowing God. The 5th on the nature of God and the Trinity. The 6th on the attributes and names of God. The 7th will be the self-existence and self-sufficiency of God, also known as aseity. The 8th lesson will be on the eternity and infinity of God. Lesson 9 will be on the omni attributes of God. Lesson 10 will be on the immutability of God. Lesson 11 will be on the wisdom of God. Lesson 12 on the holiness of God. Lesson 13 on the righteous justice and wrath of God. On lesson 14, the goodness of God. Lesson 15 on the faithfulness of God. Lesson 16 on the love of God. Lesson 17, the grace of God. Lesson 18, the sovereignty of God. And lesson 19, the Father of God. And lesson 20, the attributes of God and the biblical gospel. So the following books are recommended for your reading for further study on the attributes of God. Herman Bavinck, The Doctrine of God. This presents the attributes of God in a theological rather than practical manner. The work is very thorough and helpful. Louis Berkhof, Systematic Theology. This is one of the many excellent systematic theology works available. Part 1 is divided into the Doctrine of God and the works of God. Louis Berkhof's Summary of Christian Doctrine. This work provides an excellent treatment of all aspects of Christian doctrine and is very helpful in the section on the Doctrine of God. G.C. Berkouwer, The Providence of God. This is a very thorough work on the subject dealing with providence, divine government, miracles, theodicy, etc. Edward Henry Bickersteth. This is one of the better works on the Trinity. It is a biblical theology study proving the doctrine of the Trinity from both the Old and New Testaments. James Boice, Our Sovereign God, a practical examination of God's sovereignty by contemporary authors. John Calvin, Institute of the Christian Religion, is a systematic theology by the great reformer. Book 1 deals with the reality of God's existence and elaborates on his attributes. Stephen Charnock, The Existence and Attributes of God. This is an exhaustive study by a Puritan theologian and pastor. It is often considered too heavy for the average reader, yet this was a series of sermons that he delivered to his congregation at the time. Robert Dabney, Lectures in Systematic Theology, an excellent systematic theology by a Southern Presbyterian, profound insights on the person of God and his attributes. Dan DeHaan, The God You Can Know. This is a brief but practical discussion on the nature of God. Benjamin Farley, The Providence of God. This work examines this important doctrine from a biblical and historical perspective. It is somewhat technical. Edmund Fortman, The Triune God. This is an excellent work on the doctrine of the Trinity. It is a historical study from the Old Testament through the modern theologians. John Frame, The Doctrine of the Knowledge of God. John Frame is a Presbyterian and Ventilian. In his book, he begins his series of books on the theology of lordship. In this particular volume, he discusses and develops a thoroughly Ventilian and presuppositional epistemology. I highly recommend reading this book before reading any of his other books. John Frame, The Doctrine of God, A Theology of Lordship. This book approaches the subject of the attributes of God primarily from the standpoint of God's lordship attributes, that is, control, authority, and covenantal presence. I recommend reading Part 5, Chapters 17 to 26 for this course. John Frame, No Other God, A Response to Open Theism, an excellent critique and response to the heretical doctrine of open theism as taught by Clark Pinnock. Donald Guthrie, New Testament Theology, an excellent biblical theology of the New Testament. The first chapter of the book examines the attributes of God. A. Hodge, Outlines of Theology, a brief but excellent summary of the attributes of God in chapter 8. Charles Hodge, Systematic Theology in 3 volumes. This is an extensive systematic theology that covers the entire field. The section of the person of God and his attributes is exceptional. Christopher Kaiser, The Doctrine of God. This work presents a biblical and historical viewpoint of how the church has viewed the person of God through the centuries. John Owen, Communion with God, an excellent work by a Puritan theologian. This is from the series of Owen's complete works. This volume contains an excellent treatment on the Trinity called The Doctrine of the Trinity Explained and Vindicated on pages 376 to 439. J.I. Packer, Evangelism and the Sovereignty of God. This is an excellent work on this subject. The reason it is included here is for its great insights on the aspect of God's sovereignty. However, he does misuse the word antinomy, and he should have used the word mystery instead. An antinomy is a synonym for a contradiction. So he just misused a word. Other than that, I agree with what he said. J.I. Packer, Knowing God, an excellent work on the reality of God as a person, the possibility of knowing him, and the personal implication of knowing his attributes. Arthur W. Pink, Gleanings in the Godhead. This repeats some of the previous work, but also has additions that are valuable. It also includes a second section on God the Son. Arthur W. Pink, The Sovereignty of God, an excellent work that thoroughly examines this attribute of God. Russos John Rushdoony, Systematic Theology, volumes 1 and 2. Rushdoony is probably one of the most underappreciated Reformed theologians. Chapter 4 of volume 1 especially ought to be read for this course. Stanley Rosenthal, One God or Three, written by a Hebrew Christian and explores the Trinity in the Old Testament. Francis Schaeffer, The God Who Is There. Francis Schaeffer, He Is There and He Is Not Silent, a sequel to the previous book, defending the fact that God both desires and is able to communicate with people in a variety of ways. Philip Schaff, The Creeds of Christendom. This is a very helpful work that covers the history, content, and theological significance of every major creed of the Christian church. It presents a clear picture of how the church has viewed the person of God throughout history. William G.T. Shedd, Dogmatic Theology. This is a thorough, systematic theology with most of Volume 1 dealing with the person, nature, and attributes of God. R.C. Sproul, One Holy Passion, a very practical treatment on the attributes of God. It's also available in an audio or video series. R.C. Sproul, The Holiness of God. This is one of the few books written on the subject in the past century. This is an excellent examination of the subject, and it is also available on audio or video. Warren Wiersbe, Classic Sermons on the Attributes of God. This is a compilation of sermons by different notable preachers on the attributes of God. It is helpful due to its practical application of each attribute. So I'd highly recommend R.C. Sproul's works. You could probably watch these on video on YouTube for free or download the audio. I would also highly recommend, for the most studious, John Frame's works. He was probably one of the most influential professors I had at Westminster Theological Seminary. now called Westminster Seminary in California. Also, R.J. Rushdoony's Systematic Theologies. There's a lot of systematic theologies out there, a lot of good ones, a lot of good reformed ones, and some that I recommended here. But R.J. Rushdoony's Systematic Theology covers systematic theology more from a covenantal perspective. Alrighty, that's it for the beginning on this series. And until next time, may the Lord richly bless you.